They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas. Our goal is to understand metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. Sending Poets.
Checking out AI. What is all the fuss about with NotebookLM? My name is John. I'm here with Bob. How's it going, Bob?
Good. Good morning. How you doing?
Good. Yeah. So we're gonna go in like a kind of interesting direction for the next few episodes. So following up on the three episodes, the previous episodes, which were these archived episodes from the Call-in platform that we originally started this podcast in. All three of those are about this Pumpkinhead story that Bob came up with. I forget now, like 8 years ago, you originally kind of had this idea.
I think it was in 2016, I want to say.
Yeah.
2015, 2016. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and just over the years, just bits and pieces you've added. And then when you and I started talking, you shared this idea. The three episodes on Colin were literally me just reading through the source kind of stuff you'd put together on your website. And one of the latest kind of iterations or new things that came about with this Pumpkinheads idea, Bob found this tool called NotebookLM. It's a Google AI tool that's super fascinating. You can just load sources to it, and it's sort of like it's like ChatGPT, but you can specifically customize the data sources that you're interacting with, that you're asking the AI to respond to, or do whatever. It's really fascinating. One of the coolest things about it, though, is there's this button like generate audio conversation, and when you do that, you'll get like a 12-minute-ish podcast of two people talking, two AI people, that sounds incredibly lifelike and realistic. It's kind of spooky, but it's catered to whatever sources you've loaded. So we did that with we generated that podcast with those same 5 sources that I read through in the that we talked through in those call-in episodes, and that's what we're going to share in this episode. When we're done talking here, you'll hear that 12-ish minute podcast of these two people, and it's fascinating. We're gonna kind of iterate through this. The next few episodes will be how that podcast changes with more sources we add and stuff. But for today, it's just these 5 written sources, and I have a couple bullet points I wanted to call out, but I'm gonna stop talking here. So just overall, like what was your idea, initial thought when you heard that podcast generated podcast from NotebookLM, Bob?
I was blown away. Absolutely blown away. The technology level of generating human. I'm just talking at the NotebookLM generative side.
Right.
The quality of the human voices is so lifelike, and just the sound quality of the thing. I don't know how else to explain it. It just does not sound like anything but humans talking. It's very fascinating, like little chuckles.
Exactly.
Different mouth sounds.
Right. The nuances of things. They I think they do almost kind of talk over each other once in a while, like
exactly
finishing each other's sentences and things. It's like
throwing it
spooky
back.
and
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah, it's very very uncanny valley. It's very uncanny
Yes, right.
valley.
That's the yeah.
Very very spooky, very cool. I think that's going to be half of the game, is just kind of playing around with just the fact that you can make, well, not, you're not directly making, you're inducing the creation of guided lifelike podcasts. And it's a fascinating thing. We've all seen, obviously, ChatGPT have a conversation with you or write a term paper for you or something like that. And the image generated AI, obviously they can make, tons of photorealistic and sci-fi and fantasy and any kind of creative imagery you want. Movies coming, looks like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
motion imagery. So that'll be on the horizon. But having it be just the voice, and by extension the mind, right? This is what's so interesting about this, is it's really a test not just on the quality of the vocal representation of the content I'm sure it could easily produce in text form, but it's like this background of what is the notebook LM, I'm going to anthropomorphize it here for say, what is it thinking about? Like, what is it
Right.
what is it deciding is pertinent information? I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's going to be the duality, is this lifelike generative capability plus its thoughts and mind and understanding of the material, which is, I think, an equally interesting facet of this thing.
Right. You mentioned the AI image generation, and it's pretty good. One of the tells currently, people will say is like, look at fingers, look at words, because the AI hasn't quite cracked that. So a lot of times, if you see a hand, if you look closely at like an AI generated picture of a person, like some famous celebrity doing something, you're like, oh my God, can you believe they're doing that? If you look at their hands, like they might have extra fingers, some of the fingers might be in weird directions. If there's text in the image, you might be able to see like, oh yeah, that's not a real letter, that's not even a, what is that, little things like that. And
You're
I
exactly
wanted
right.
to
Yeah. No,
I
I think
wanted
you're
to say that
exactly right.
yeah, I think I noticed a couple small things like that in the notebook LM generated conversation. So, like for example, this this opening kind of scene of the Pumpkinhead story takes place at a barbecue, but in all the written, documentation, I think it's just the letters BBQ, and that's
Yeah.
how they said. I don't think they ever said the word barbecue. They're just like at the BBQ, at the BBQ. So
Yeah.
that kind of made me wonder, like, do they know that BBQ is synonymous with barbecue? Probably, but maybe without having the word barbecue, that's just, anyway, it's the finger thing. It's like, is that a weird finger that I'm hearing? You know what I mean? Like,
No, I
same.
think you are. I think you are hearing a weird finger. I think that's a perfect analogy for it. And I think that it goes back to what does it understand? I mean, the level of understanding here, I think, is the test. We're kind of doing
Right.
this next level Turing test thing.
Right.
This is it. Honestly, this is like contextualized learning and having human level associations built into grasp what comes next. I don't know. I mean, this thing will have to keep adding more data, obviously, but this first draft, if you will, of a podcast is, I mean, it had probably three, what do you think, three, maybe four, just a small handful of these little flubs, these little fingers, if you will. And
Yeah. No. Right. I think. Yeah.
I mean,
Like I think she said the WASP P knife instead of the wasp knife.
maybe there was a
Little
typo,
things.
there might be a typo in the source material. That's
Oh shit, it could be, I guess. But
I'd have to
yeah.
go check, but probably something as simple as that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that it doesn't have understanding at this level. It doesn't, these are literally just putting a letter in that doesn't exist, but it looks kind of generally like a letter.
Yeah.
Like there's no
And
understanding that is a component of a word, and the word is symbolic abstraction to, something we would say or think, and then that thing is an abstraction on an actual thing, or place or emotion or something. You know what I mean? Like it makes none of these leaps. Like zero of these connections are being made.
And yet some of the things that are said could fool me that maybe it does. And I'll give you an example. There's the scene where the mom kills her son tragically and stuff. The lady reads it and she goes, uh, when I read that, it really stuck with me. And I'm like, what do you mean? When you read that, it really stuck with you. Like, whoa, dude. So there's a few things
Oh
like that.
wow.
Like she also says something about like nightmare fuel, which is interesting in itself. We've talked about the Time Suck podcast before, and Dan Cummins does the Scared to Death podcast as well, and then he does a extra bonus sort of feed, and it's called Nightmare Fuel, and it's just like scary stories and stuff. Now, I think that's purely coincidence because we didn't throw any sources about Scared to Death or Time Suck or Dan Cummins in there, but it does seem clear that NotebookLM can pull from more than just the sources. It is like ChatGPT. It's trained on some vast large language model. This is something that we'll be investigating over time. Is it? I don't know. Is it stopped at September 2021 like ChatGPT? The last time I had checked, yeah, it'll be super fascinating as we go through the iterations. Yeah. So, the other thing that I noticed in this one, it was like 3 or 4 times where there was a yeah, just a quick like yeah, in agreeance of whatever point whoever was making. And I think most of the time it was after the girl said something, there was a yeah, but it definitely sounded like a third person. And in my head, I was here like,
Totally.
I was like,
I heard that too.
there's 3 people sitting around, but one of them only says yeah. So I thought that was interesting. And then, yeah, the one of the last lines, I think, that's what we'll finish here before we play it. The last line was also kind of a creepy thing, but before we get to that, yeah, anything else you want to say before we?
I definitely agree that they did have some extraneous voices pop in every once in a while, which was pretty interesting. I just I love this concept of like a extra finger or missing finger or something in the thing. It's exactly what it feels like. I think it's just getting started. So if this is the bad version, oh baby, like
Yeah, right. Yeah,
this thing's gonna get hot and it's gonna get used a bunch and trained up on and just getting started. So I'm very, very interested in seeing how this progresses and using it as a very interesting new tool in the process of producing content. I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
yeah, agreed. All right, so yeah, so this last line I'll leave you with, and we'll let you hear this thing. The way they end it, the guy goes, now I can't remember if it was the guy or the girl, but the line was, sometimes the scariest monsters are closer than you think. Like, okay, thanks AI. But
No,
anyway,
there's some definite bangers in there. I mean, they
yeah,
got some gems, absolute gems of like the nightmare fuel variety and talking about how it makes them how it makes them feel or whatever. I mean, it's that really stuck with me, that kind of thing. I mean, it's definitely interesting to hear a human level conversation output, but that's what it's training for, right? I mean, it's training just to get all these little sounds and these little things that are represented mathematically and then just manipulated without any understanding at all. I think that's the interesting thing, is to keep in mind that there is no understanding here, no matter how cool it sounds and how well they turn the phrase, which is a great way to end the show. Obviously, is
right.
some kind of a interesting scary monster tagline kind of a thing, which everybody's impressed. I mean, I'm totally impressed by this thing, but always remind yourself there's no understanding here at all. It doesn't get it yet.
Yeah, right. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for listening. If you've used NotebookLM, please let us know, because it's be fascinating to hear other use cases of this tool and stuff. Sendingpoets@gmail.com. But with that, here is the first iteration of the NotebookLM conversation.
All right, so we're diving into a horror series concept today, and this one's set on Whidbey Island. Idyllic, peaceful Whidbey Island. We've got a family, a BBQ, fireworks. It sounds like the perfect summer night, right?
Yes.
But this is a horror story, so we know things are definitely not what they seem. What do you think? What makes this setup so interesting?
Well, it's that classic horror trope, isn't it? The familiar setting, the idyllic setting, suddenly turned upside down. It's like we're lulled into this false sense of security and bam, the rug's pulled out. And in this story, there's a really unique twist. They've added that Groundhog Day element.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so we experience the whole nightmare, but we see it from the perspective of each family member. Each episode is a new point of view.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, we're putting a puzzle together piece by piece, but each piece reveals something more and more terrifying. Okay, so before things get too creepy, let's meet the family, shall we?
Right.
We've got Dad. He's a Bering Sea crab fisherman, tough as nails, loves his family fiercely, but, and this is a big but, he's constantly grappling with those long stretches away from home. Months at sea.
It's classic. You can see that archetype of strength, that stoicism, but right away you sense the tension, that underlying tension and the burden of his absence. And then you have Mom.
Right, Mom's the glue.
Exactly. She's holding it all together, the quintessential supermom, but even she's feeling the strain. Holding down the fort alone, it takes its toll.
Yeah, you can really sense those cracks starting to show beneath the surface of this perfect family. And then we've got the kids, each one representing different facets of, being a teenager. You've got the oldest son kind of wrestling with the weight of his father's expectations.
Well, of course, you've got the popular twin living the charmed life, but is there a downfall coming? And the smart twin, the introverted one. She's closer to Mom, and maybe, just maybe, she's the only one who senses what's coming.
Ooh, foreshadowing. And we can't forget the youngest, the baby of the family. He's idolizing his dad, right? He represents innocence, that pure love, which honestly just makes everything so much scarier.
Oh, for sure.
And then there's Grandma.
Right, Grandma. She's the anchor, the voice of wisdom. But I'm sensing a but coming.
Well, she could be a source of tension, too.
Exactly. She's that reminder that life is precious, but also fragile, and I have a feeling that's going to be a big theme as things unfold.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's fascinating to me is how the creators are setting up these characters, these almost archetypes, to explore what happens when people are put under extraordinary pressure.
It makes you think who will rise to the occasion, who will crack, and who will completely surprise us.
Exactly. And that brings us to the real source of the horror here. The Pumpkinheads. And these aren't your typical zombies, are they?
Not even close. What's terrifying about the Pumpkinheads is they're parasitic. We're talking about an infection that takes control. And, get this, it's delivered via meteor shower, so we're already in sci-fi horror territory.
Hold on, a meteor shower.
Yeah.
So everyone's outside, looking up at the sky. No clue those meteors are carrying these microscopic spores.
Talk about insidious, right? And here's where it gets really unsettling. The early stages, they mimic intoxication.
Oh, no.
Someone who's infected might seem a little off, clumsy, their judgment's impaired, but it's all a facade because behind that seemingly harmless behavior, the parasite's in control.
Oh, that is creepy.
Yeah.
So they could be anyone, anywhere. They could use our loved ones against us.
Precisely. And the way the infection spreads, let's just say a quick bite on the arm is the least of their worries. We're talking bodily fluids. And it gets worse. As the infection progresses, they become stronger, faster, more physically capable. This isn't something you can just outrun or outsmart easily.
So you said earlier that headshots wouldn't work on these things. Why is that?
It's like as the infection takes over, the parasite, it actually changes the host's body, makes their head incredibly volatile. A bullet wound there wouldn't stop them. It would just, create a much bigger, much more gruesome problem.
Oh, that's just horrific. Okay, so there's no easy escape. Let's go back to that BBQ, though. We have all this knowledge now. You mentioned a flirty neighbor, Dad's best friend, and some secluded encounter. What's happening there?
So that encounter, it's a turning point. This is where things go from normal to absolutely terrifying really quickly. What starts as harmless flirting, well, let's just say it doesn't stay that way. That encounter at the BBQ, that's our first glimpse of just how horrific this infection can be, and it is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, no more summer BBQ vibes for sure.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty disturbing knowing what we know now about those Pumpkinheads, especially that first transmission at the BBQ. You mentioned these waypoint scenes where we're going to relive events through the eyes of different family members. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works? Like, why are they so important?
So this is where the storytelling gets really interesting, because we're not just getting a straight line narrative, we're experiencing this nightmare, this whole thing, from all these different angles.
Right.
And each character's perspective, it's like, it adds a whole new layer of understanding to what's going on, new emotional depth.
It's kind of like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yes.
You know, something awful is about to happen,
Yeah.
but you're seeing it from all these different points of view.
Exactly. And each viewpoint gives you a new understanding of the tragedy unfolding. Take Dad, for example, his initial encounter with the infected. In his POV episode, we really get to see his thought process. This terrifying new reality is hitting him. His protective instincts kick in, but he's in over his head.
He's used to battling like the elements out there are the Bering Sea. Not this. This is a whole other thing.
Right. It's totally out of his element. But then we revisit that same encounter, but this time through the eyes of his oldest son. You remember, he's the one who's been struggling to live up to Dad's expectations. And all of a sudden, we see that whole scene in a whole new light.
Because now he's the one who has to step up.
Yes. We see him trying to process the chaos, the fear, everything he thought he knew is gone. And it's in those moments of extreme stress, that's when we see his true character emerge.
And that's where that surprising heroism comes in.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
He has to confront this terrifying situation, rise to the occasion, and he digs deep, taps into this strength he never knew he had, this resilience.
And he's not exactly starting from scratch. What about that toolbox his dad had? I mean, this is a Bering Sea crab fisherman. That's got to be some serious gear in there.
Oh, yeah. We're not talking about your average household tools here, and that's where the WASP comes in.
Okay, so not something you find in your average garage. Tell me about the WASP.
Well, the WASP, it's a perfect example of how an ordinary object becomes a tool of survival when you're in a fight for your life. It's designed to inject this burst of compressed gas, and underwater that's deadly.
And on land?
Let's just say it's effective. And by effective, I mean very gruesome. It's a brutal weapon. There's no getting around that. But against these pumpkin heads, it might be the only thing that gives them a fighting chance.
Yeah, it makes you think about what people will do when they're pushed to their absolute limit, like what they're willing to use to survive.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? And the WASP pack, it's effective, yeah, but it's also a reminder of how brutal this reality has become. There's no reset button here. Every encounter, every moment, it comes at a cost.
And sometimes the cost is just unbearable.
Yeah.
The source material mentions this one scene, and it's heartbreaking. Mom has to make a choice, a truly impossible choice, to save one son and not the other.
When I read that, it really stuck with me. It just highlights the horrible decisions these characters are forced to make. They're stripped bare. There's no normal anymore. Just these impossible choices. And those choices, they'll stay with them forever.
Oh, absolutely. It's like nightmare fuel. But even in those dark moments, there's this glimmer of hope, this incredible capacity for love and sacrifice. And that brings us to the smart twin. Her story just destroyed me. I mean, she was always the observant one, right? The one who sees beneath the surface.
Always.
But in this instance, that awareness comes at a terrible, terrible cost.
It does.
So help me understand this. We know she sacrifices herself to save her sister, but what makes her story so impactful?
It's the way she accepts her fate. There's no hesitation, no drama. She just does what needs to be done. A quiet kind of heroism,
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who seem most vulnerable, maybe they're the strongest among us.
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? Her story, it really highlights that whole theme of unexpected heroism. It's not always flashy or loud.
Right.
Sometimes it's about quiet courage, about putting others first, even if it costs you your own life.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like even in the darkest moments, we're still seeing these glimmers of hope. The things people will do for the ones they love, the smart twin, mom, all of it. It's a testament to how strong people can be when they have to be. But we know it's not over. We're left with what's left of this family. And they're changed forever, obviously. So what happens next? How does this fight for survival, how does it end?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. This is where we move beyond this one family, because what we've seen so far, that's just one piece of this whole puzzle. The horror here, it's so much bigger than just them.
We're talking about the collapse of society, right?
Exactly. We've seen what's happening on a small scale, but zoom out. Whidbey Island, the rest of the world, it's all going to hell. And it's that classic us versus them story, but
Well, with a twist.
with a huge twist. Because the them, in this case, they used to be friends, neighbors, even family.
Okay.
And that's what makes it so terrifying. It makes us ask ourselves, what does it even mean to be human when you're up against something like this?
I mean, how do you fight something that can lie to you?
Yeah.
That can look and act like someone you love? It's like those instincts, the ones that are supposed to protect us, they become a weapon against us.
That's exactly what these final chapters are grappling with. It's not just about staying alive physically. It's about, holding on to your humanity.
You said it before, but it's easy for those lines to get blurred when everything's falling apart.
Too easy. The source material, it talks about this final showdown. The remaining siblings, they make their stand.
And this is where those waypoint scenes, they become even more important, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to see this final stand through different eyes.
Each one of them adding a new layer to the story.
Yeah. And revealing some hard truths about what it costs to survive.
And what it means to survive.
Because there are no easy answers here. The creators of this, they don't shy away from that, do they? The moral lines get blurry.
Not even blurry. They're gone. They've disappeared. And it makes you think, could I make those choices?
That's the heart of it. What would you do if you were in their shoes? If it was your family on the line? Could you do what they did?
Exactly.
Wow. This has been such a thought-provoking concept to dive into. Thanks for bringing this to us, and thanks, as always, to you, the listener, for coming along on this journey. Until next time.
Remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are closer than you think.
And that's a wrap on today's show. Thanks for listening.